Welcome back. The Longing is a game that takes 400 days to play. Yep, you heard that right. 400 days. That's 9,600 hours or 576,000 minutes. The damn thing even has a 4-hour long trailer. It sees you playing as this little gremlin fella who's called a Shade, who is created by the Old King to essentially serve as a living alarm clock whilst he has a nap and charges up his powers. This leaves you with 400 days to spend doing not very much. You can walk very slowly around a bunch of boring caves, paint pictures, grow mushrooms, and even read the entirety of Moby Dick, all in real time. The Longing's primary mechanic is basically just waiting. In order for new areas to open up, you have to wait for a spider to spin a web, a stalactite to fall from the ceiling, and even wait for moss to grow, and this can take days or sometimes even weeks to happen. Blessedly, time still progresses while the game is closed, but that's not exactly much of a consolation. You might be thinking that this game sounds terrible, and to be honest, I was thinking exactly the same thing when I started playing, but luckily I think The Longing turned out to be pretty fantastic, in spite of the fact that it is objectively boring. Somehow, this game was able to get me to care about the Shade, keep me engaged for longer than a bunch of AAA games, and most importantly of all, teach me a fundamental lesson about how games motivate players, all through the use of that big 400-day timer. Which brings me onto the subject of this video. I want to talk about temporal mechanics, that is to say stuff like countdowns, loops, schedules, and all those interesting things in games that have to do with chronology. More specifically, I want to explain how they work, why messing with temporality is such an effective way to change a player's state of mind, and to break down why this makes The Longing one of my surprise hits of this year so far. But if that all sounds a bit complicated, my good friend Tychus Finley can break down what this video is all about very succinctly indeed.
Hell, it's about time.
Let's start at the most logical point, the very beginning. Time limits are probably the oldest and simplest temporal mechanic, and it's really no surprise why they're so damn popular. By lighting a fire underneath players, forcing them to play at a faster pace than they'd ordinarily be comfortable with, games can ramp up the pressure and force players into truly mastering what they're doing, or create interesting decisions that encourage people to take risks and improvise in order to make the most of their limited time. The oldest time limits can be found in arcade games and platformers, and they serve a very important purpose. By giving players finite time to tackle every obstacle, not only is the difficulty increased, but players also avoid the boredom of attempting the same thing over and over. A time limit encourages players to roll with the punches and keep moving, rather than obsessing over one tiny detail. For example, in Pikmin, getting all your ship parts before the 30-day limit is elapsed, as well as not being caught out in the open at nighttime, is pretty tricky, leading to great, tense situations as you rush to drag ship parts back to base or kill a boss before time runs out. This leads to you making a lot of mistakes and having to take interesting risks, as waiting around rebuilding your forces and taking things slow sometimes just isn't an option. These exact same principles can also work in the case of narrative time limits. Vintage spoiler warning for Mass Effect 2, skip here if you don't want to hear small story details about an old ass game. For the most part, Mass Effect 2 has a very relaxed feel, as you jet around space building up your ragtag team of badasses. But once you get your hands on the Reaper IFF that allows you to enter the Omega 4 relay and head to the final mission, a secret countdown is started. The next mission you go on will be interrupted by the Normandy getting invaded and all your crew getting kidnapped. And from then on, every mission that passes without you going to save them leads to more and more of the Normandy's personnel getting harvested for their delicious meat juices. This time pressure creates a great moral choice between rescuing the fun side characters and doing the right thing versus being selfish and getting all your squadmates loyal so that they don't die in the final mission. In my first playthrough, having to pick which characters I really liked and which characters I was okay risking was an awesome choice, and it was one I only got to make because of that soft time limit pushing me towards the final mission. Of course, this being a Mass Effect game, there's a way to get everyone loyal and also save all the crew, but that is a whole different issue. Interestingly, stuff like time trials and speedrunner mechanics are sort of time trials done in reverse, and as such, create the opposite play experience, where time pressure created by the developer induces tense, hectic gameplay, when the onus for setting the limits is shifted to the player, it instead encourages more thoughtful and almost zen, mastery-driven gameplay. Verlet's Swing, a grapple-hooking vaporwave platformer, is fun enough on its own, but there's a sense of deep satisfaction you get from improving your times or finding sneaky routes and openings that you'd never be able to get if you were rushing through every level at top speed and not stopping to really understand and appreciate all the nuances of the level design and the grappling mechanic. Spelunky's Ghost is a great example of both of these kinds of time limits in one. Whenever you enter a new level of the caves, a 2.5 minute timer starts, which once elapsed summons this fella, the Ghost. The Ghost kills you in a single hit, is unkillable itself, and can even phase through blocks, meaning that new players have to balance navigating through each level quickly enough to avoid summoning and being murdered by the Ghost, but slowly enough to avoid making a mistake and dying anyway. As players get better and better at navigating to the goal, they can use spare time to comb through each level for extra goodies and items, racking up a bigger score. However, there's an additional layer to Spelunky's Ghost. Any gems it passes through while hunting you down turn into super valuable diamonds, so the time limit for expert spelunkers is more like the time they have to prepare for the Ghost's arrival, whereupon they make bank as they try to avoid it. The Ghost starts as some fun pressure for noobs, stops average players from farming cash forever, but lets experts show off their stuff in these ridiculously complicated dances that test their understanding of the platforming fundamentals. Surprise surprise, Spelunky's great. If time limits are responsible for motivating players through the threat of failure to go fast enough, then what about time loops, where players are forced to replay the same snapshot of time over and over? They're sort of a limit, but also effectively infinite in length. How do they work? Well, more often than not, the function of a time loop isn't to motivate players through stress, but to act as a reset button and give players the opportunity to explore the same locales and mechanics from a different perspective, and equipped with new information. Minute, for example, sees you given 60 seconds to live and asked to solve a bunch of puzzles before you get respawned. What this leads to is you gradually building up a picture of what needs doing and the fastest way to move around the map across various lives before finally executing it in a single perfect run. The Sexy Brutale also uses time loops as a puzzle mechanic. At the end of each day, the nightmare casino you're trapped in resets, but you can use your knowledge of how your friends died in one loop to save them in the next. For example, once you know Sixpence here gets shot, you can save him by finding a blank cartridge during the next loop and inserting it into the murder weapon, giving him time to defend himself. Fundamentally, what time loops are great at is creating a sense of familiarity with an area, cast of characters, or set of systems. With every go through the loop, you're getting to know that play space a little bit better, and uncovering additional layers of nuance as you go. When you first start playing Outer Wilds, the solar system beyond Timber Hearth can seem incredibly daunting, with planets disintegrating, teleporters going off, and things exploding seemingly at random. But with every loop, you learn something new about how the 21 minutes of time you have plays out, and that chaos slowly resolves into a sense of intimate understanding of the cosmic dance that plays out each time you wake up. The events happening, like Brittle Hollow breaking up or the tornadoes on Giant's Deep, always happen the same way, but your understanding of them and how they work is constantly changing. For example, the dust storm on the twin planets starts off as a hazard that can crush you and suck up your ship, becomes a fun time limit as the deposited sand fills up this network of caves, before finally becoming an opportunity as sand leaving Ash Twin reveals these important endgame towers. This is the key to using time loops correctly. When you think about it, you can make the argument that most games have some sort of time loop at their core, but games that really make the most of this mechanic are the ones that take advantage of the way our perspective and understanding can change over time through successive goes through the loop. One really interesting example of time loops is in Quantum League, a competitive FPS where you play the same duel 3 times, alongside your previous lives, meaning that if you shoot the enemy who killed you in the previous loop, you can save your own life and other paradoxical nonsense. This completely upends the fast-paced and twitchy nature of most FPS and turns the game into something much more cerebral, as each player figures out not only how to score points, but also how to work around both their own and their opponent's past lives. The more rounds go on, the more complicated your relationship with the battle landscape becomes, with players laying down fields of fire and creating traps in round 1 that go on to define the terms of engagement right up until the final seconds of the game. Even games without narratively justified time loops can still engage with this core concept. During your early assassination attempts in Hitman, you'll really only be getting a glimpse of the puzzle box that is each level, but with each successive loop, you'll be able to recognize the fundamental patterns and schedules that hold the world together and begin to manipulate them. For example, the central race that dominates the Miami level ends exactly 17 minutes after you first start, and you can use this to plan some really creative assassinations like trapping the garage or kicking the driver's dad onto the track at just the right time to get him run over by his daughter, which is as amazing as it is completely brutal. Limits and loops are all well and good, but I think to understand the fundamentals of our relationship with time and get our heads around why the longing works, we need to think more simply and contemplate waiting. That was 5 seconds of silence, and it felt like an eternity, right? We as human beings are naturally impatient. Waiting rarely feels good in the moment, but it can have its uses beyond simple padding. By demanding a player wait for something to happen, be it a special event, the completion of a building, or simply for a daily cooldown timer to tick over, like in say Animal Crossing, a game builds up anticipation and excitement in the mind of the player, giving them time to think about what they'll do once the wait is over and also plan their future actions. This way, when things finally do happen, the sense of achievement is heightened because of the build-up, and the player is going to have more appreciation for seeing the task completed. Incremental games are this principle turned into an entire genre. All you're really doing in idle or clicker games is waiting until you can click a button to make waiting for the next thing slightly more efficient. It sounds boring and unfulfilling, but as anyone who's gotten sucked into Cookie Clicker, Forager or Universal Paperclips will know, the post-wait milestones these games hand out can be hugely rewarding, and more often than not will give you a new system to play with or a new resource to manage that help keep things fresh and also give you new things to wait for. The appeal of delayed gratification can also feed into some really fun optimization puzzles, as players work to minimize the time they spend waiting, and in the process only become more invested in the time eventually elapsing. More often than not, games will have several of these gratification loops going at the same time, ensuring that the player always has something to look forward to. By sprinkling in active components like cookies to click or resources to gather, idle games can keep players constantly occupied and engaged, all through simple and intuitive mechanics. The longing is this sort of design taken to its logical extreme. Instead of waiting for merely a few seconds, minutes or hours, the longing sees you waiting for days, weeks and possibly even months for things to happen, and all you've really got to do in the meantime is gather coal, drawing supplies and crafting materials to make the Shade's wait more bearable. And this is where one of the longing's cleverest mechanics comes in. The more comfortable you make the Shade's weird little house, the faster time advances because they're less bored. This means that not only is actually playing the game strictly optimal if you just want to get to the ending, but it also gives you a bunch of great opportunities to get invested in the Shade's struggle. With each new item of furniture you make, and each seemingly insignificant goal you achieve, the Shade's outlook on life improves, and because you spent so much time guiding them from room to room and waiting for doors to open, these things feel great to accomplish, and you can't help but get attached to the little monster as a result. The game's use of loops also feeds into this effect. Because logging off in your room is strictly optimal, each gameplay session plays out very similarly, with you slowly exploring the same areas over and over. This creates the opportunity not only for you to watch them change, but also for previously scary and new areas to become comfortable and familiar over time. This is also how your relationship with the Shade evolves. They're pathetic and off-putting at first, but after spending enough time with them, eventually, you'll begin to empathize. Without the longing's glacial pace and its tactical use of boredom, it would never be able to build up the anticipation required to make its milestones feel meaningful. Nor would you be able to build up a relationship with the Shade, as you'd be too focused getting from point A to point B. When getting to the dark caves beyond the kingdom takes about 2 hours, even something as pointless as meeting a new spider friend becomes this memorable moment, and the knowledge in the back of your head that your time with the Shade must one day come to an end makes those highlights all the more important. This is where that big 400-day countdown timer comes in. Just like all timers, it acts as a source of pressure, but because it's so slow, even when you've quintupled the speed time passes at home, it never really influences your day-to-day actions. What the timer does do is serve as an existential threat to you and the Shade. When that 400-day timer elapses, the game is over and the Shade's duty will be complete. This seems simple, but with no way of knowing what will happen when the king wakes up, and the fact that you helping the Shade only makes the clock tick faster, you may begin to doubt the old king as well as the initial premise of the game. Some reasonably mild spoilers for The Longing here. I won't go into any major detail about the endgame, but if you fancy playing the game for yourself, you may want to skip ahead to this timestamp. In effect, the timer presents you with a moral choice. Rather than the game simply going into stasis when you close it, time still progresses, so choosing not to play is actually just the choice to consign the Shade to their fate. This forces the player to weigh up the pros and cons between making the Shade's sad life down in the caves as comfortable as possible, or helping them escape. Helping the Shade escape pretty much just asks you to do yet more waiting puzzles, but because you're invested in their struggle by this point, even something so simple as making your way up a steep cliff or unpacking some vague riddles feels like a real moment of triumph. That's the power of The Longing's design, as well as temporal mechanics in general. Even if the average playtime for The Longing is somewhere in the region of 12 to 20 hours, it's the perception of a 400-day game that drives us to either conquer or escape it, even if you'll never actually devote anywhere near that amount of time to the game. The Longing doesn't need action-packed gameplay, a bunch of different mechanics, or a story full of twists and turns to motivate me to beat it not once, but twice. All it needs is an understanding of how to make the comparatively mundane, engaging, emotionally resonant, and compelling enough to make me come back once the novelty had worn off. The reason why The Longing's use of time is so effective is because whilst you have a lot of it, the end is inevitable and you can never go back. This is the super important lesson I mentioned earlier. When you get right down to it, time itself is one of the great driving forces, not just in getting us to play video games, but also in our lives in general. You as humans, and I as an ageless super being, only have so much time in the universe, and so we're driven to use our limited schedule as best we can. When we play games, we can't help but try to take shortcuts over mountains, optimize killing baddies as quickly as possible, and see all the content the game has to offer as fast as we can, because we only have so much time to play games and we want to make the most of it. Time limits and time loops are such effective motivators because they play on these real-world impulses and fears. We live constantly worried that we might not have enough time to do everything we want to, and we wish we could replay elements of our lives to understand them better or change how they happened, and video games allow us to explore those feelings in a way that's cathartic. This need to use our limited time drives almost all of our decisions when you get right down to it. Success, children, wealth. We have a deep longing for all these things because we only have a limited time to get them in. Note my use of the word longing. This is what I think the game is all about. We as gamers are often so eager to use our precious time as efficiently as possible that we sometimes don't use it meaningfully. We waste hours grinding away at stuff we don't really enjoy because it will make other stuff we also don't enjoy happen slightly faster. We pour hundreds of hours into 100%ing games by doing all the boring filler side quests, and we get manipulated into blowing money on sketchy free-to-play games that let us skip ahead, robbing us of the satisfaction of a job well done. Instead, I think it pays sometimes to just take a moment, look past the flashy colours and mechanics designed to milk you of your endorphins, and just slow things down. And I'm aware of the irony of that coming from the immortal space being who speaks about 200 words a minute. By taking our time and appreciating the experience of games as we play them, taking in the details and the smaller moments that add so much to the texture of truly great titles, we can enjoy the journey of playing them that much more, as well as make the all-important destination feel better too. This is why it's so important to understand temporal mechanics. Limits, loops, and waiting can make great games even more compelling and turn understated titles like The Longing into experiences that stick with you for a very long time. However, they can also be used to trick us into playing games we don't enjoy anymore or are just plain bad. On that note, next time you boot up a game, I want you to think about why you're playing it. Are you genuinely enjoying yourself, or just going through the motions? Are you appreciating the experience of playing a game, or are you too fixated on optimizing your play to really enjoy it? And of course, are you spending your limited time wisely, or are you just watching dumb YouTube video? You know what? Forget that one, you're good, keep watching. In fact, let's loop around again, shall we? Yeah. Welcome back. The Longing is a game that takes 400 days to play. Hey, and welcome to that bit at the end of every video where I talk about things that aren't in the video. Whatever. Anyway, I want to plug Grace Lee and her channel What's So Great About That, which I just found and is pretty great itself. I was not expecting to enjoy a leftist reading of Untitled Goose Game and the nature of taking back power quite as much as I did. Please check it out, as well as the rest of her channel. If, on the other hand, you fancy supporting my continuing nonsense, then you might want to consider pitching in on Patreon, where you'll get updates, sneak peeks, as well as a little special thing from the Architect Archives coming alongside the next video. So stay tuned for that. My increasingly large group of top tier mysterious benefactors also get a free shout out at the end of each video, and they are Alex Deloch, Asaran, Alsakav, Baxter Heel, Big Chess, Bodhi, Branlab, Brian Lazariani, Konstantina Punkt, Daniel Metjes, David Sester, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Doodlehog, Evie, Elliot Godzich, Philip Magnus, George Sears, Gretar Hannison, Items to Astound on DM's Guild, okay, sure, whatever, Janos Fakete, Jordan, Joshua Binswanger, Kai Gillespie, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Lunar Eagle 1996, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, Knox, Patrick Romberg, Philby the Bilby, Prospero, Ray's Dad, Samuel Vanderplatz, Sheldon Hearn, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, and Chow. Thank you for all your support, it is an honour to be able to do this for a living, and I will see you soon. Bye!